I have the easy part here. I just ask the questions. I don't have to provide the answers. But my name is Michael Gordon. I'm a New York Times correspondent, and I had some recent experience in the KRG and also in their fight against the Islamic State. It was in November that I managed to do an embed with the Peshmerga and Sinjar for the operation there. It was a good adventure. Peshmerga embed's a little bit different than the U.S. military embed, but it was a good experience. And what I saw there was that while the Peshmerga benefited from extensive U.S. air support before and during the operation, it was still a fight. It wasn't just walking in there. There were still suicide bombers, and the Peshmerga forces acquitted themselves very well and certainly had the will to fight, to push ISIL out of Sinjar and also reclaim Sinjar for the KRG, which is the other side of it. What I also saw when I was there in November was a country, and I think our guests will address this, that is going through a region, a country, an autonomous place inside Iraq, whatever its destiny is. It's going through a very severe economic crisis. I think there's no other way to put it. With the Peshmerga not being paid for 3 months, with school teachers not being paid for 4 months, with construction and foreign investment pretty much at a halt. And due in part, but not entirely, to low oil prices. So what I think our speakers can address is a situation in which the KRG is both prosecuting a war against ISIL, but doing so as it's sort of in the midst of, while it's under considerable economic strain, maybe even approaching bankruptcy, really. So, well, I think our guests have already been introduced. Deputy Prime Minister Qubad Talabani and the Minister of Interior and Acting Peshmerga Minister Karim Sinjari. And I'm going to ask a few questions and then give them a chance to make their own points at the end of the short session. First off, Karim, what is the situation at this point inside Mosul? What's your best information? You have people come out of Mosul, they come to Erbil, you can debrief them, you no doubt have your own sources there. What's happening? Is the Islamic State weakening? Is it strong? What's the situation?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. The situation in Mosul really is catastrophic. The situation is very bad. ISIS control everything. They started to recruit people from Mosul to work for them. Especially they started with teenagers for 12 years old, kids, to recruit them in their militia. The economic situation is very bad. So for that, the people are encouraged to go and work with Daesh for $200 a month to survive. So the economic situation is very bad. ISIS started their foreign fighter, increased the number in Mosul now, and they divided them. After that, they heard that will be operation against Mosul. They divided most of them outside of Mosul to protect the city from any attack.
What will be the Peshmerga role in the eventual battle for Mosul? Will you go into the eastern part of the city, or will you limit yourself to pressuring ISIL from the north?
You know, the Peshmerga now are based northwest, east of Mosul. And in many areas, they are 17 to 20 kilometers far from Mosul. So the Peshmerga will be we will participate in the operation Mosul after the coordination with the American and the coalition forces with the Iraqi government. So we have to have a joint plan, and everyone know what is his role, what he is going to do, and then the plan should be after the liberation of Mosul, what will be inside Mosul. So our force, we will be helping in any attack to Mosul.
But will you go into the eastern part of the city? Are you prepared to do that, or do you think that would be unwise?
We are not planning to go inside to the city because we don't want this to be as an Arab Kurd fighting used by Daesh. We will be around the city.
One more question, then I'm going to ask a question to the Deputy Prime Minister. Because the Peshmerga have not been paid for 3 months, is that correct?
Yes.
Are you having deserters, and how are you managing that problem?
Really, the financial situation affected the Peshmerga negatively, and we start to see some deserter. Some of the Peshmerga, when they go home for holiday some days, some of them doesn't come back because they have to pay rent for their houses. They haven't. They have to pay for their kids' school, health, and food and everything. So they haven't. So some of them, they prefer to stay home and do another work to get some income to help his family. But to now, the number of the deserter is not high.
1%?
But
5%?
less, about one less. But if this situation continue for more 2 or 3 months, I am sure the number will increase. And it will affect the fight everywhere.
So now for Qubad, a question for you, for the Deputy Prime Minister. It seems that it used to be a year ago, if you talk to somebody from the KRG, they would say, we need weapons. And having seen the weapons the Peshmerga have, I would say they're not of the same sophistication as the ones that the Iraqi army have. You don't see nearly as many armored vehicles or MRAPs, or certainly no mine clearing equipment that I saw with the Iraqi army has. Although there are some weapons, sure. But now it seems the refrain is, we need money and weapons. Are you looking for direct budget support here in Washington from the U.S. government? What sort of financial help are you looking for?
Right. Thank you, Michael, and thanks to FDD for having us here. I have personally some very fond memories of this great organization. Cliff, May, and I traveled around the country in the build-up to Operation Iraqi Freedom, talking about the importance of democracy in Iraq and Kurdistan. John Hanna, a good friend and colleague that we worked many years together. So I feel among friends here, which is why I feel that I can be brutally honest among friends. Yes, a year ago, weapons were our number one request because we were fighting a war against an enemy that had significantly greater firepower than us, and still today has much more advanced weaponry and advanced military capabilities in terms of logistical and military weapons capabilities than we do. But in this time, in this year, our economic situation has declined drastically, and we are facing unprecedented fiscal and economic challenges in Kurdistan, largely brought about by the drop in oil prices, but also it's an accumulation of policies by the federal government in Iraq. If you remember, they cut our budget in 2014, and our costs were incredibly high already. A war is always costly, and as a result of this war, Kurdistan is now home to 1.8 million internally displaced people and refugees. This adds further social and economic burdens on the Kurdistan region. Because of all these shocks that our economy faced, we fell in arrears to pay our civil servants. We are falling back in arrears to pay our soldiers who are valiantly defending the front line against ISIS. At the same time, our investment projects, our capital investment projects have all come to a complete halt. So yes, absolutely, we are facing a very dire financial and economic situation, which, if we cannot resolve, will undoubtedly impact the ability of our forces to keep the front line the way that we have done.
So are you seeking direct budget support from the U.S. and other governments, and what conditions might you be willing to accept if you were able to persuade the United States to provide this support?
We need
what do you want?
We need direct budgetary support. We have a gaping hole in our economy. We have a massive deficit. that is accumulating every month, and we need direct budgetary support to plug that deficit. We need to be able to meet our payroll demands, and we've made this explicitly clear to our friends in the US government. As far as conditions, we have absolutely no problems with any conditions that are going to be placed on financial assistance given to us. In fact, conditions could actually help us, because parallel to dealing with this crisis, a major part of our policy to respond to this crisis is actually to enact strategic reforms. And those conditions that come with financial assistance, if they can help us reach our reform goals, it actually helps us push through some very difficult and unpopular reforms with our public. So we have absolutely no problems with conditions being placed on financial assistance.
Would you acknowledge that the large public sector, that you maintain public sector employment and other aspects of how the government has managed the economy is a big part of the problem, that one of the reasons you face an economic crisis isn't merely the decline in oil prices, but the KRG's own management, stewardship of its budget?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no secret. We have a massive government, we have a massive civil service, and we were a country, an entity, a region, however we can be defined, which handed out oil rents. When oil is $100 a barrel, we had large revenue streams. So we dispersed those revenue streams. We hired lots of people, we pensioned off a lot of people, we expanded our social safety net to cover a whole range of people, from victims of Saddam's chemical weapons to people of low income and disability insurance, and a very wide net was cast, which we could afford at $100 a barrel, but crippling us at $30 a barrel. So absolutely we need to downsize our civil service, but again, we're not a country. So countries that face economic crises have levers to manage their economy. They have monetary policy, they can print money, they can devalue currency, they can borrow, they can go out to international markets, issue domestic bonds. They are susceptible to bailouts and large financial packages from the IMF, from the World Bank, from friendly countries around the world. All of these three options are off the table for us because we're not a country. We're not able to be in charge of our own monetary policy. We're already in debt, so the ability for Kurdistan to incur more debt is very limited. And nobody has really come forward till now to offer us a bailout package. In fact, we know that finance ministers from around the world are meeting today in Washington to talk about all kinds of assistance, and we're hearing of a package being brought to Iraq that we insist that we must get our fair share of this packet, but at the same time, we're hearing of more political turmoil in Iraq, which is potentially complicating the world's efforts to come to Iraq's aid again.
How much money are you looking for?
We have about $100 million deficit a month.
So you want the U.S. government to provide $100 million a month?
We'll take any amount, but we have $100 million that we spend every month more than we have. And this, if this accumulates, this means we'll fall behind in salary payments. Earlier this year, we made a very painful decision. We slashed government spending by about 46%. We slashed employee compensations by another 39%. So we've started on this road to reform. But for us to be able to execute these reforms and get out of this bind that we're in, we need direct budgetary support.
I'd like to ask a couple more questions and then give you gentlemen the last word. Obviously, in Washington, there's a lot of focus on the eventual, I was going to say pending Mosul campaign, but I would say eventual battle for Mosul, since it's been several times deferred. Is there currently an agreed plan between KRG, the Iraqi government, the U.S. government, the coalition, and perhaps other elements to take Mosul? Is there a plan for what would happen after Mosul?
How would you define plan?
And should the popular mobilization forces, or so-called Hashtag-Shabi, be part of it?
So if you're talking about a comprehensive plan that is on a table, that includes maps, that includes a distribution of roles and responsibilities, that includes a vision for chain of command and exact units and where they're going to be stationed and where they're going to go, and then what happens politically, and what do we do with the Turks, and what does the Iranians do, and what does the Hashd al-Sha'bi do? No, there isn't a plan like that. We're hearing that there is a plan being drawn up. I know that the US military commanders on the ground, they have a vision, they have a very clear idea of what they want to achieve and how they think it can best be achieved, but they're not the only actor on the ground. There are a myriad of Iraqi forces, organized and unorganized forces that are in the mix. It's tied into some of the political problems facing the country. The Kurdish forces, and the minister can go into more detail, the Kurdish forces, we're ready. We haven't been paid, but we're ready, and we know what we can do, and we know what we can bring to the table if there were to ever be a comprehensive plan to liberate the city of Mosul. Now, the military side of things we feel is going to be less complicated than the politics and the governance and who's going to administer Mosul, and how are we going to recreate an actual physical border between Iraq and Syria, which has to be a key component to any plan to fully liberate Mosul and eliminate the threat of Daesh from Iraq. And that, I think, requires a much more in-depth look at problems in the country, political problems between the various political parties, and then how can we ensure that the forces that combine to liberate Mosul all play ball, all stick to the plan, and that there are no surprises along the way.
So let me ask you, Minister, should the, and then you can each make your last statements, should the so-called popular mobilization forces, and by that I mean not the Sunni tribes, but the Shiite popular mobilization forces, whether it's Badr Corps, Kataib Hezbollah, Saib al-Haq, whomever they are, Hadi al-Amri's people, should they be part of the battle for Mosul? Is that acceptable to you? And lastly, if you could just address, because I think this audience would like to hear it, what is Iran's role and influence in Iraq today and in the KRG?
Who?
Iran, the Iranian influence and role.
Thank you. First, about the popular mobilization. Mosul is a different city from all other cities in Iraq. Mosul, you have in Mosul Arab, Sunni and Shia. You have Kurd, Sunni and Shia. You have Turkmen, Sunni and Shia. You have Christian, you have Shabak, you have Kake. So it's a mosaic mixed. For that, we as a Kurd, we say we will not enter Mosul. So we don't want to be a fight between Kurd and Arab, to be used like that. So in the other side, when the Shia militia come, it will be the same. And from now, ISIS already, they started to have big TV stations, TV show in the city, in a cafeteria and things like that, to show what the popular mobilization did in other places. So they are telling them, if they come to Mosul, they will do the same. So for that, we don't want, not we, not other Iraqi forces and Sunni tribe to be, as they call it, Hashd al-Watani, to go to Mosul.
Can you address Iran's role? Make whatever closing remarks you want to make, and then Qubad, you make your closing statement.
Iran, of course, Iran is a big country and is a neighbor to Iraq. They have influence in Iraq, they have relation with Iraq. And they are helping the Iraqi government a lot. And at the beginning of when Daesh attacked us, they helped us too. So they are playing a role in Iraq.
So you seem to be saying they're playing at times a helpful role.
At the beginning, they helped us to defeat Daesh.
And now?
Now we are not asking their help. Because we have the coalition forces, they are helping us, and we are doing the job with them.
And are they a positive force or a disruptive force?
Who, the Iranians?
The Iranians.
To the time that they've been with us, they helped us.
Okay.
And that's our Minister of Peshmerga. Can you imagine how skilled our Minister of Foreign Affairs is?
Do you want to make a closing statement? And one thing maybe you could address is, given all the woes you've mentioned, economic woes, security issues, is this a good year to have a referendum on whether the KRG should be independent? If you're having all these difficulties not being independent, would it be easier to, how would you take this on if you're independent?
So I think that what's important to realize is we're a sub-sovereign entity, but we're facing challenges that even large powers would have difficulties dealing with. We have this massive financial crisis. We're at war. We have this humanitarian crisis, which we believe will only get worse with any attempt to liberate Mosul. We are already housing 1.8 million displaced people. We are expecting another 500,000 displaced people, at least, if there were to be a prolonged military campaign against Mosul. Now, this comes in a climate where we're receiving very little assistance. We're being spoon-fed military support in this war on the ground. We're very grateful for the air support that we're receiving from the coalition. It's caused a significant change on the battlefield. But the humanitarian assistance is slow and not targeted and not strategic, and the budgetary support hasn't come to date. So this places us as the most vulnerable entity in this coalition against ISIS, because unlike neighboring countries who are receiving refugees and IDPs, one, we are not a country, and our host country, Iraq, is providing no assistance to us. Two, we're the only place which is at peace and at war at the same time. And so we're trying to manage our own administration. We're keeping our community safe, but at the same time, we are at war. So, you know, and we always say this with our colleagues in the US and our friends in Baghdad. We always hear about the number of 17%. 17% of the budget to Kurdistan, 17% of any support that gets given to Iraq should come to Kurdistan. But in reality, we don't have 17% of the IDPs in Kurdistan. We have much more than 17% of the displaced people that have come to Iraq in Kurdistan. We don't have 17% of the conflict with ISIS. We have a much greater percentage than the conflict with ISIS. So I think it's important for our friends to understand that we've kept this front line. We're going to keep this front line. But unless we get direct support, unless we get a greater level of support across the board, political, economic, technical, and humanitarian, we'll be unable to continue the way that we are doing. Regarding the referendum issue, it's no surprise, it shouldn't be no surprise to anybody in this room, that Kurds want to be independent. It's a natural right of the people of Kurdistan to be independent, to have their own country. And that right has existed. We're commemorating the 100 years of Sykes-Picot this year. And we're seeing how that's turned out in the world. So for us at this point to start having a serious conversation, first within ourselves about independence, but more importantly with Iraq, and we were in Baghdad just last week, and we told the Prime Minister we need to have this conversation. There needs to, because the first country we need to reach an agreement with, if we are to become independent, is Iraq. We're not going to go strike a deal with Turkey or go and strike a deal with Iran or come and ask assistance from the United States before we actually speak to the country that we are currently a part of, which is Iraq. Secondly, the rise in Kurdish nationalism is coming at a time when Kurds are yet again not getting their fair share of their rights from Iraq. We're not having our budget cut. We're not getting any support to deal with the humanitarian situation. We are not getting our fair share of the medicine that Iraq buys centrally and distributes across the board. We're not even getting the medicine intended for the IDPs, which are Iraqi IDPs that have been sent to us by a one-way ticket from the folks in the federal government. So all of these burdens on us, of course, is going to raise nationalism. Of course, it's going to make people feel disaffected and disenfranchised from being part of an Iraq that we, in reality, have not really benefited from. Other than wars, devastation, chemical weapons, genocide, scorched earth, what have we benefited from this country called Iraq? And ultimately, We've been waiting 11, 12 years for this constitution that we worked very hard to ratify in Iraq, to actually be the law of the land, and it hasn't come into effect. So are we going to have to wait another 11, 12 years to finally determine the constitution and act on the constitution? I'm not saying it's going to happen tomorrow. I'm not going to say tomorrow we're going to announce independence, but we need to have this conversation. We've started to have this conversation, and it shouldn't be, the subject is not a taboo anymore. And I promise you it will not result in the end of the world if one day Kurdistan were to declare independence.
Well, thank you very much. I think everyone here could agree that you've both been, I think, very effective presenters of your KRG perspective. And so that this is going to conclude this panel.